taken place in several countries in the hemisphere, and Honduras is the first country to say, we're not going to tolerate this, we're going to save our democracy, and we're going to push back. So last week, the Army, acting on the authority of the Supreme Court and the elected Congress, including every single member of President Zelaya's political party, who voted to have the Army remove him from office, and they accepted his resignation letter. The Army flew him into exile in Costa Rica. So there's a big controversy now. The Obama administration, Fidel Castro, Hugo Chavez, are all allied to try to isolate Honduras, which is one of the poorest countries in the hemisphere, and try to bring the country to its knees to force the Hondurans to accept the return to power of this anti-democratic president. And they're allied right now in a campaign to isolate Honduras. The Hondurans are being really brave, and they need American backing. They need the backing of the American public or influential voices in the United States and elsewhere, because they're really standing their ground. In fact, the new acting president of Honduras has said the only way former President Zelaya is going to take power in our country is if another foreign country comes in and invades and forcibly installs him in power. So the Hondurans are fighting. They're in a fighting mood, and I think we really need to stand by them. The problem is the United States has chosen to ally itself with Chavez and has become so engaged or so really obsessed with process that they really don't care about political power. This is not a statement of a commitment to democracy on the part of Chavez and Daniel Ortega and President Obama. It's a question of political power. If it was a question of commitment to democracy, you would have seen a categorical objection to the current Chavez government in Venezuela. Here's a guy who tried to take power in a military coup to overthrow a democratically elected constitutional government in Venezuela. He then was elected through democratic means and then exploited and abused the democratic system to install himself as president for life. He's then replicated this model in Bolivia, Ecuador, Nicaragua, and then was trying to do so in Honduras. So it was really important that we push back. If we were really committed to democracy in the region, we would not be endorsing the likes of Daniel Ortega, who took power in a bloody revolution and ran a military junta for a decade before coming back to power by democratic means. So there's this rehabilitation of these totalitarians and a marginalization of the pro-U.S. Democratic forces in the region, and we need to be supporting those democratic forces, but not at the expense of process for process's sake. And this is the key error of the United States. It's not just Obama's fault, unfortunately. It's the fault of the Bush administration previous, which neglected the hemisphere and allowed Chavez to stay in power, did not back a military effort in Venezuela to oust Chavez when they had the chance, and basically ignored the region for all intents and purposes, with the exception of counterterrorism and immigration and counter-narcotics. And as such, allowed Chavez to build a huge political empire in the hemisphere using his petrodollars. The Venezuelan government owns the Citgo oil company, for example. So every time an American buys gasoline at Citgo, they're literally transferring their cash to Chavez, which he's using for his subversive political purposes in the hemisphere. So there's been no campaign to isolate Chavez. There's been no campaign to neutralize his political warfare operations in the region. There's been no effort to back pro-American forces in the region, of which there are many. Recent case in point being El Salvador, right next to Honduras, a key American ally, the only Latin American member of the coalition in Iraq, for example. And the U.S. stood by and did nothing while the communist FMLN was elected to power by only 60,000 votes last March. And the U.S. State Department, both under Bush and under Obama, sent messages to the Salvadorans that it didn't really matter to the United States if the communists won. They would support whoever won because we support democracy. This is a huge break with our entire tradition in the region, where we always pulled out all the stops to make sure that the communists could never win an election. And if they ever tried to take power, we would try to limit and marginalize their ability to rule. And we didn't do that in El Salvador. To the contrary, we actually ended up inadvertently helping the communists win and oust a government or a party that had been an ally of ours for the past 20 years. So it's really refreshing to see the Hondurans starting to push back. The problem is now we've lost so much of our influence in the hemisphere because of our neglect, because of the small amount of resources we're putting in the region, but really because we have no strategy in the region, that we're on the verge right now of giving control of the Organization of American States, which is the intergovernmental organization, sort of a UN of the Western Hemisphere. We're giving dominance of that organization, which we've dominated for the past 100 years, to Chavez. So the United States is really receding as a power in the region, and in fact we are seeing now how outside powers like China have more influence in some Latin American countries than we do now. So anyway, in sum, the Hondurans need our support. This is not a question of anti-democratic military destroying democracy in Honduras, but to the contrary, it was the only means the Hondurans really saw at their disposal to stop their president from violating the Constitution and installing a Chavez-backed dictatorship. So that's the take on Honduras here from the Center for Security Policy. I'm Michael Waller. Thanks.